Anger pushes you and motivates you to protect yourself and defend yourself. If they can numb that out of you or demonize it to the point where you will never feel it or acknowledge it, then you're never going to defend yourself and they can do whatever they want. You won't speak up for yourself, and that's what they want from women. Hello, critters. The Lord has called me to start my professional pickleball career. I hope you all support me in this awesome journey. Okay, I can't even pretend that, actually. It's really cringe. Today I wanted to react to this video of Paul and Morgan that, even for Paul and Morgan, made my jaw drop to the floor. For those of you who do not know, Paul and Morgan are fundy Christian YouTubers. They've been at this for a while. Recently, Paul has been pursuing a career in pickleball. Yeah, and they've made some vlogs recently where Morgan is literally exhausted to the point of breaking down. She's sick, her kids are sick, she's taking care of them by herself, while he is off training for a pickleball career. Instead of getting a real job. So that's a little bit of context as to who we're looking at and why the pickleball thing is relevant. For those of you who don't know, I grew up as a Baptist, and then in college I was recruited into a cult, a very abusive cult, so I've experienced spiritual manipulation in its rawest and most intense form. So when I watched this video, you might say that I had a trauma response of sorts, where I got really activated due to the similarities in tactics I saw in this video of spiritual manipulation, but I prefer to call it my spidey senses. My spidey senses were going off. Since I experienced spiritual manipulation and abuse on like a really intense scale, like I said previously, I like to try to educate about it where I can to help people recognize it when it's happening to them or loved ones, because I might as well turn it into something positive. And I feel like this video is a really good example, and I want to say, Morgan, I'm on your side. I think that this belief system has lied to you and now has you with a boot on your neck. And I would love to see you thrive without that boot. Hello, it's editing me. When I recorded this video originally, I had COVID brain. I really don't like the way I said something, so I'm going to come in every once in a while just to sprinkle a little zhuzh on what I'm saying. So here I am now. Hi. I do want to clarify that I am a hater of their ideology. And I'm kind of a Paul hater, but not that I think he's a horrible person. I don't think he's a bad person. I don't really believe there are good and bad people. That's a whole other topic. I think that he benefits from an abusive ideology, and he can't see past that, and he has unhealthy habits because of it, that can be manipulative, but I don't think he's a horrible person. But I am a Paul hater at the same time. It's also a little bit funny that I addressed Morgan when she would never watch this video. Only Paul would. Paul, I hope you can sincerely take some of this criticism to heart, knowing that I don't think you're a bad person, but I am going to be really harsh on you in this, and hopefully coming from a cartoon possum, that's easier to absorb. I also just want to add for everybody that if you've been hurt by stuff that Paul and Morgan have said, they've done harm online, you don't have to forgive them. I'm a big believer in rehabilitation, letting people grow past their past harmful ideologies. I believe in redemption for even people like Paul and Morgan. I don't believe that there's good and bad people. I don't. I think that when we, put a label on people as like evil people just because of their ideology is harmful. I think we're being as dogmatic as we were when we were evangelical. We are literally just very confused and flawed by evolution. Monkeys on a floating rock in space in an uncaring universe trying to figure this shit out, and it's really hard to be a human, especially with these brains that are prone to tribalism and, all that stuff. So I really believe in rehabilitation, but that also means, at the same time, this is nuanced, you don't have to forgive them. I feel like I'm in a healed enough place to do that, to reach across the aisle and to show empathy and forgiveness. But if you're not, that's okay. So if you've been hurt by things I said, you don't have to have this level of empathy. And really want the best for Morgan. And I want to use this video for educational purposes because I see lots of spiritual manipulation here and lots of spiritual bypassing and gaslighting. This video's nuts. I cannot believe he posted this and thought that it was a good idea.
Well, guys, if I'm being honest, vlogging is one of the last things that we want to do right now. I'm being totally honest.
Okay, so first of all, then don't. Then don't. You don't have to do this, Paul. I think he's very much fallen victim to the content brain, and thinks that these sort of conversations need to be processed online. You can't process fights and feelings and things like that with a camera in your face. It's inherently gonna change how you're acting and thinking.
No, for especially Morgan, but oftentimes these times are the most appropriate times, if we're just being real, the most appropriate times to vlog, because it is showing the realities of life rather than like the polished stuff. We just had our drive back from Cleveland, Tennessee to Lexington, Kentucky, and it was horrible.
It was the ride from hell.
It was horrible.
Paul does this thing where repeatedly, when Morgan's in distress, he videotapes it. I can't help but notice that it's always when Morgan is having a problem, when Morgan is, really struggling. He shoves a camera in her face and calls it quote unquote raw and real, when that just means something that should be handled privately and maturely like adults, maybe in couples therapy at this rate. And I want you guys to know that there is a thing called digital abuse. I feel like Paul knows that when his wife is in distress, it will get more views. And he knows that Morgan can't speak as freely as she would like to because there's a camera in her freaking face. There is something, and I'm not saying that Paul is abusing Morgan, but I do find it scary that this resembles the definition of digital abuse.
Morgan, I would like for you to share just your experience there, and I think hopefully there will be some good stuff that comes out of it.
Go, Morgan. Tell them what happened.
There's a lot. Well, guys.
I also want to point out, if you compare a video of Morgan to a few years ago, the obvious absolute exhaustion is so prevalent in how she speaks and on her face. And if you hear her talk about it, we know why. She's the only one caring for her kids and they don't sleep, and Paul doesn't help. I just want to point out that Morgan is obviously exhausted all the time in her recent videos and is really struggling, and Paul has done nothing to step up and help his wife.
So today is Sunday, and I played with my brother in the 4-0 mixed division, and we played 4 games. There were 5 teams in our pool. We played 4 games, and we won 1, lost 3. And as soon, we went from game to game to game to game. There really weren't any breaks, which is fine. But as soon as I was walking off the court from the last game, my mom was like jogging towards me and was like, Luca just shoved something up his nose. And she was like trying to keep me calm, but she was like, he just shoved something up his nose, which he's now done like 3 or 4 times. He's okay. I need to find the nose sucker so I can suck it out. And I was like, that's not gonna work. I gotta go.
Move your chair over this way. I'm trying to get out of the overhead a little bit.
So we had just lost like our last game that like was, if we had won that game, we would have made it into the medal round, or the whatever semifinals.
Main draw elimination, yeah.
So that was like a bummer, but I like didn't even have a chance to process that because I was like booking it then to run to go help Luca. So I like literally run, cover his nose, and blow in his mouth. A snot bubble thing pops out of his nose. I jump to that. Then as soon as I'm done with that, I literally turn around and Judah has come over to me in his little walker and grabs onto me and starts like yelling at me to get him out of there. So I pick him up and get him out, and just jump into mom mode. Then we find out like we're officially done playing, and so we just load up. We just load up and we head out, and that was it.
Well, and we had kind of contemplated what the best option was going to be. We knew she was probably going to get done around 6 o'clock, and it was like, do we stay another night because it's about a 4.5-hour drive, or do we grab some food and then head back to Lexington?
And I wanted to stay the night.
She wanted to stay the night. I wanted to get back to start our weekly routine, get back for Monday morning stuff, and also not spend money on another night. And I felt like we weren't going to get home super late, so I felt like it was very doable. She, I think, was thinking more about the kids' sleeping schedules, which I understand.
I just had a very, very gut-wrenching feeling that the drive was not going to go well. I knew that Judah specifically probably wasn't going to get amazing naps, which means we would have an overtired baby who doesn't like being in the car in general for long periods of times, and the timing was going to be super weird, and I was correct. I was freaking right. So the first hour...
Well, and I was optimistic. I knew there was potential for that, and to me, I kind of weighed things. It was going to cost, again, more to stay another night. It was also unloading our stuff all in a hotel. It was just, I weighed things out. I decided, let's get home. We'll get home at a decent time, and hopefully the kids will sleep. And that did not end up being the case, particularly for Judah.
Okay, so there's an idea in Christianity and a lot of more conservative Christian circles, like for Paul and Morgan, I believe they subscribe to this. It's called complementarianism, where they believe that, men and women have different roles and they're quote unquote equal, just different. Then the man has the final say and the man's the leader, women takes care of the kids, etc. And they do different things in the church. This sort of mentality often leads to women not having a say, men not being held accountable, and victim blaming. And that is what's happening here. Morgan has the wisdom about what her kids need because she's the primary caregiver. So if her opinion was equally valuable, they would have listened to her in this case because she is the expert on her kids as the primary caregiver. That would logically follow if this was her role. So complementarianism lies and makes it seem all flowery and nice, but ultimately women's opinions, women's insights are not heard. You can try to flower it up as much as you want. It's just not what happens. Morgan's insight she's an expert on this. And ultimately, Paul still made the decision. And he ended up being wrong because he didn't listen to her when she knew better than him. She's the one who takes care of the freaking kids. So yeah, the equal but different stuff just on a larger scale will fall apart. But even on stuff like this, where women have valuable insight, Morgan had more knowledge and was still ignored. And then it led to this horrible experience because her input wasn't valued. And you get to see this happen over and over with Paul and Morgan. Her input is not valued. Ever. He talks over her all the time. Even when he's like, okay, you say it, he won't let her get a sentence out. If complementarianism or whatever was the best system from God, I just don't understand why it would lead to so much abuse and bulldozing of women. It's clearly a man-made concept.
Luca fell asleep at 9:30. Judah fell asleep at 10:10. So literally for 4 hours, Judah.
Hey, you're all about the details,
screamed
though.
and cried. No, it's
No.
part of the story.
Well, yeah, no, right.
And it's why it was a ride from hell.
You're all about the details. So I was going to say, as soon as we left the pickleball place,
So here, Paul is being super dismissive, like, oh, you're all about the details. No, she's giving good context as to why this fell apart, because she knows better. And then, immediately in the next few seconds, he's gonna, after dismissing her as being all about the details, deflect onto her as if she was the problem.
all about the details. So I was going to say, as soon as we left the pickleball place, we ran to get food and then get on the road. We go to Freddy's Burgers. Morgan was in the mood for Freddy's Burgers. We sit there in the line
For probably 35 minutes. Like, literally terrible. And we're trapped. Like, we can't get out. It's like there's like a literal hill that we cannot drive our car over.
So we're sitting there, and then that's when, like, the kids start crying. And then we get up there, and he's like, hey, the fryers were packed inside, so it's going to be even longer. And
Paul, you'll notice, can never be in the wrong. It can never be his fault. He made this decision that led to this horrible evening. But he immediately has to be like, well, then we had to stop at Freddy's because Morgan was in the mood for Freddy's, and then we had to wait another 30 minutes. Immediately making it sound like it's her fault. What were they supposed to do, Paul? Go without food for 4 hours? When they're already screaming? Were you just supposed to not stop for food? That seems like the thing you have to do if you're going on a 4-hour road trip. But somehow this is Morgan wanted Freddy's. Paul is very good at directing blame, deflecting blame, because this goes back to this complementarianism that we're seeing, where men can never be held accountable for their decisions. And we'll see more of this later in the video. But Paul is not used to taking accountability for his wrongs, because he's the head, he's the one who makes the decisions, he's the one who has the authority from God, so he can't be wrong.
this is the beginning of our hopefully good road trip home. And it was even in that moment, I just felt like there was, I don't want to like over spiritualize it, but just this spiritual heaviness of kind of like, all right, here we go. We can kind of choose mentally and spiritually and emotionally how we're going to react, because it's probably going to be a rough trip home.
Here, Paul is over spiritualizing every single experience. This is what is often the result of this conservative Christian mindset, where suffering is seen like a spiritual thing, as a spiritual attack or a spiritual test. And Paul literally will call it this later, and we'll get into it then. But he over spiritualizes the situation, being like, oh, there was a spiritual heaviness. It couldn't possibly be the guilt that Paul feels for making the wrong decision. We have to over spiritualize it as a way to spiritually bypass what is going on. And We've talked about spiritually bypassing before on this channel, but it's basically when you avoid facing a tough emotion, dealing with something, processing something difficult through, religious platitudes, thought terminating cliches, over spiritualizing so many things. It's basically just a way of avoiding something difficult internally through spirituality. So here Paul is spiritually bypassing the guilt he feels, or the possible feeling of being wrong, by turning it into a spiritual heaviness. It was a spiritual experience. Over spiritualizing also allows people to deny the physiological, environmental factors that are going into a bad situation, which is really convenient for Paul here, considering he created this issue. Also here, Paul is setting it up as we can decide how we're going to react from this point on. Setting up that he chose to react in the right way and to stay calm, because he doesn't have to deal with the kids all the time. That's easy for him. So it's setting up Morgan's frustration and overstimulation and just absolute exhaustion as a spiritual failing in a decision that she made.
Like, I just was feeling that. I don't know, were you feeling that? Or were you just kind of like already, was your mood just tanking?
I was already ticked off.
Yeah. And again, you're just coming straight from losing your final game. You had no time to process it. It was unfortunate. So then we're sitting there for a long time, wanting to be on the road to get home at a good time, knowing that there was some snow that was coming, that we were trying to okay, we'll have to probably drive through a little bit of snow coming down, whatever. So then we get on the road, and Judah was, in my mind, I'm thinking he's gonna wear himself out, probably cry some, and then go down. It was
horrible.
And I get it, what you're saying of like something about when a baby starts not just crying, but like scream crying. There are certain times when that's just, as a parent, really, really difficult.
Imagine Morgan having to deal with it 24/7 all day, every day with no break, Paul. She literally got off the pickleball court and immediately had screaming kids. I've seen you on your little coffee trips after a morning of training at pickleball, just having a good old time while Morgan is at home sick with kids, screaming. Imagine how she feels.
Just on our emotions.
It's like a physical pain for me when I hear my children cry. And like my brain is like, the neurons in my brain are just going fireworks, insane, and I can't think or process or do anything. I cannot breathe.
Yeah, and also in your mind, I just know now how it all works. You're thinking about tomorrow. You're thinking about how this is not just messing up right here and right now, but the sleep schedules. You're very invested in their sleep schedules. It was just horrible.
She's invested in their sleep schedules, because she will have to deal with the consequences later of their sleep schedules being messed up by your selfish decision. She has to deal with the consequences. You want to get home ASAP because you want to be there for the morning. She's having to think about how this is going to affect the ride home, the next day, another sleepless night for her that she's had a lot of lately. That is another issue with this complementarianism that they try to sell to young Christians. It makes it hard for men to empathize with women's struggles because they can't speak up about them. They're taught to believe that they're the leaders that are, ordained by God, receiving God's wisdom. So they're not listening to the women.
First car ride of my life, and I just could tell from you, and it was a test in many respects, but I could just sense it, you were not hiding your mental and emotional state. You were. So
here we're getting back into the spiritual bypassing that Paul always does. Turning this experience where he made a wrong decision and it caused bad consequences into a quote unquote test, or like a spiritual test, or a test from God, is spiritual bypassing. Because it makes it seem like it's an intentional lesson or something that God is putting them through, not Paul making a shitty decision. And this happens a lot in spiritually abusive systems, where they'll put you through suffering and then call it a test, so that you never blame your authority. It can never be their fault. This happened all the time in the JMS cult. When my life was literally falling apart as a direct consequence of what they were doing to me, is a test. You have to over-spiritualize it, make it a spiritual thing, so that, it can't be a failing on the people, on the leaders who made those decisions. You'll notice in these spiritually abusive systems, the leader can never be at fault. And that is exactly what Paul's repeated. He literally can't be at fault.
Having a terrible, terrible time. And I was praying for you, under my breath. I was praying.
Paul, maybe instead of doing nothing, you could say instead, I'm sorry. Or you could Google hotels because you realize what a decision you made. When Christians say, I'm praying for you, sometimes it's very sincere, and it comes from a really sincere place. Like, if you're going through a hard time and they say they're praying for you, sometimes it's like, oh, thank you for thinking of me, even though I don't believe in prayer. But there's also times where it's so clearly a slap in the face because clearly they think they're more aligned with God than you and that you need help. It's very much an holier than thou perspective. So instead of admitting his decision was wrong, apologizing, trying to help Morgan fix the situation, he's going to do something that's nothing, but makes him feel like he's high and mighty doing something wonderful and that he's super spiritual. This reads like such a slap in the face because, again, it's saying Morgan was having a moment of spiritual weakness, so I'm going to pray for her because she clearly needs it. Instead of being like, I am putting my wife through psychological distress and it's my fault and I should fix it. While having to hear this part, while editing again, if my husband said that he was praying for me to receive grace with screaming kids as a result of the consequences of his actions, I would literally throw him in the ice cream machine at Freddy's. I would put him in the fryers myself, and I would leave and get a hotel. I am full of rage.
Under my breath, I was praying, I was thinking about where Paul said, in this region of Asia, the trials and persecutions were so horrible that we despaired of life itself. We came totally to the end. And that's where I felt like Morgan was. God gave me, I think, just more grace to endure. But for Morgan, I felt like that was where she was. And so I was praying like, Lord.
It sounds so stupid and dramatic.
You kind of had to have been there. But it really was like that. And I was praying like, but for the Apostle Paul, he said, the Lord allowed us to go through that to teach us that his grace is sufficient. His power is made perfect in weakness. So I was praying, Lord.
And again, here's another example of this conservative Christian mentality leading to suffering for no reason. And putting yourself through suffering because you think it's holy, or framing suffering that could have been avoided as just like a necessary test. You don't have to put yourself through this unnecessary suffering.
If your grace isn't going to come down and cause Judah to stop scream crying, then just give Morgan in particular and I grace to endure it. I don't know that he necessarily, I don't know that Morgan receives that grace.
This part made me lose my freaking mind. Because again, instead of acknowledging that you made a bad decision that is now psychologically distressing your kids and wife, we're making it a Morgan problem. Somehow in this situation, we've made it a Morgan problem. It is now a quote-unquote spiritual failing on Morgan for not receiving God's grace. And that's exactly how the JMS cult ran all the time. And I want to reiterate that I'm not saying that they're a cult. I'm just saying spiritual abuse rhymes. I recognize this. In this spiritually manipulative situation, when I was in JMS, anytime that a prediction or a prophecy that the leader made was wrong, it was wrong because we didn't pray enough, so we didn't fulfill the condition. Or if I was struggling mentally, emotionally because of the intense distress they were putting me through, it was a spiritual failing on me. I wasn't praying enough. I wasn't waking up in the morning to pray. I wasn't reading scripture enough. I wasn't doing enough. I wasn't believing in God enough. It was always my fault. And that's exactly what Paul does to Morgan nonstop. When I hear this part, I just see myself in Morgan. It's a spiritual failing in Morgan for not accepting God's grace, not the fact that she's exhausted and at the breaking point from having to take care of 2 small children, babies, by herself 24/7 and getting no sleep for what feels like I've been hearing for months from them.
But we made it home, and now we're here sitting here talking to you guys at 11 p.m. And there were little graces throughout the trip. If you look back and you really, really pay attention.
Oh, thank goodness. Oh, thank goodness. Paul putting his kids and Morgan through this is okay, because if you just look at the little thing, shut up,
attention to it and look for them and receive them. But man, just buying as a whole, the car ride was horrible, particularly for you.
and it was your fault, Paul.
Do you feel like spiritually, just is it too soon to even try to go there for you?
I just don't really want to be processing this on camera.
Okay.
And again, then they continue, he should have immediately respected her not wanting to process this on camera. But there is such a lack of consent from her in this video that it's unreal. Her input is never valued because of this complementarian system, and here is another consequence where she cannot truly speak her mind, be heard in the clear signals she is giving that she does not want to do this.
Knowing that we have a million haters who are gonna make stupid videos about this.
I'm not a hater, Morgan. I swear I'm on your side.
Morgan's sitting here all blah blah blah.
Well,
It's just a lot.
yeah, again, it's hard. Some people are going to watch this and probably not get it. Others, I think, are going to watch it and actually have a ton of empathy. And it sounds cheesy to say like, oh, when you're a parent, you know, you'll get it. But sometimes that just has to be the case. And the testing that some just life scenarios put you in and put you through, the fire, I think there's just kind of no way to go around it.
It was your decision, Paul. You could have gone around it. Oh my god.
Like, you almost have to go through it, and whether you
No, you
fail
don't.
the test or you do amazing, like, you're gonna go through it and you're gonna get refined.
No, this was avoidable. Paul's decisions were directly what caused this, but because he's the leader in this situation, in this like hierarchy, how do you say that? In this hierarchy, that he can never be wrong. Because that means God's wrong. And Paul needs to rely on this spiritual bypassing of it being a test so that he doesn't have to face the fact that he was wrong. That's hard for him.
If you want, we can collect our thoughts and you can end it tomorrow. There's very little that can prepare you for moments like that.
I think I'm just mad at myself for like a lot of reasons. I'm mad at myself for doing this pickleball tournament because it's just like not the time in my life to be doing this pickleball tournament stuff. Like, and so like I made it 10 times harder on me and everyone around us because they all had to watch my kids. And like, why did I do the tournament? Like, what the crap was the point of it?
They're also Paul's kids, to be clear. Also, Morgan deserves, at the very least, to have hobbies. So here she's absolutely beating herself up. And Paul says nothing. For having a hobby for like 1 minute. She's around her kids 24/7. That's another consequence of this complementarianism that is just so clearly unfair, is that men get to be fully fleshed out, realized humans, while women have to give up everything to be a mom. Morgan can't even have hobbies anymore. She feels guilt for having hobbies. You have to give up your entire identity. The men don't have to do that. Paul gets to run around and play pickleball and pursue his little career in pickleball. And Morgan has to give up everything. And it's important to note also that this pressure in evangelical or conservative Christianity for women to take care of the kids by themselves and that to be their primary job is not natural like they claim it is. Because throughout most of human history, raising a kid took a village. It was a group effort. It was not on one woman. So now, not only is it hard enough to raise kids as a couple by yourself, to put that on the woman, of course they lose their entire identity. Of course they're broken down. It's too much, especially more than one kid. It's heartbreaking. So it's just like a super unfair, biased in one direction system that they try to play up as just like different but equal when it's not. And they try to make you think it is. They try to sell it to you, but know that it's not. And that's not the reality. You have to look at the reality of what actually is a result of these systems versus what they tell you is going to happen. And repeatedly, we see women absolutely beaten into the ground by this system, while men get to be fully realized human beings.
And then I feel like I worked really hard to like play well at the tournament, and I just didn't do what I hoped I would do, and it just sucks to lose so much. Like, it just hurts.
Hey, let me ask you this real quick. I appreciate you opening up. Do you feel like there were any moments in the tournament where you were like, wow, like I've actually am playing well, and the work I've put in has paid off, and I am enjoying it?
Not really. Like, I knew that I was playing well, but it wasn't good enough, and so that's just what sucks. But it's like, of course it wasn't good enough. I can't play every day of my life. Like, I'm a mom of 2 kids. These people that were going up against play is so much more than me. So, like, what did I expect? It's just stupid. And so I'm just mad. I'm mad at that. I'm disappointed and ticked off at myself for being so
just like down and heavy in the car ride when things were just going insane, and that I couldn't pull it together and have joy in every circumstance. And
Morgan, there's no way you're watching this video because I am in fact a cartoon possum. But please know that I'm on your side, and I want to support you. I have so much empathy for you in this moment. There's a lot to unpack here. Notice that Morgan, in this distress that she's in, has somehow made it repeatedly in numerous ways about her feelings, and that shame and self-hate is like, and that anger is being directed inwards towards herself when she has every reason to be mad at Paul. But instead she's pointing it inwards and internalizing it because she has to. Because in this system, women are not allowed to be angry or upset. Like she literally just said, her goal is to have joy in every circumstance and always have it held together. But that's not healthy or normal. And also, not feeling that anger and upsetness is just going to have it exist in your body forever, and you're never going to process it. And it's going to come out in dysfunctional ways. To explain what I'm talking about when I say that if you can't process it and actually feel these emotions, they'll come out in dysfunctional ways. I want to give an example of how that happened for me, just to help you conceptualize it. So when I was in therapy, I am triggered. Not anymore, I've worked through it. I was very triggered due to my time in religion by the idea of someone seeing me do something wrong because of the whole God concept and the fact that sins and mistakes were like an existential threat. So there was one time in therapy where my therapist was like, I think that you're thinking a lot instead of feeling. And then I felt triggered and embarrassed because I was like, oh my God, I look so stupid. I tried to be vulnerable and then I'm doing it wrong. And like, I got really upset and left that session that day crying, like just really upset. I was like fully triggered. And that's what caused it. But when it was explaining to her why I was upset, my instinct when I wasn't ready to face what the real reason was to say, oh, I'm just mad at myself. I'm mad at myself because I'm not getting better fast enough. I'm not healing fast enough, or like, I'm just not making progress. But then like, I realized that that's not what that was. That's what I told her, and that's what I thought it was because I wasn't ready to face what it actually was. But then the next session, I was like, you know what? I think it was actually this. I think I'm triggered by, people perceiving me doing something wrong. And because I hadn't really processed that and wasn't ready to face it, it came out and like, I just thought it was me being angry at myself and and then I started beating myself up. So like those emotions will come out, like they will. It'll be dysfunctional and it'll be misdirected and oftentimes pointed inward. So that's an example. And we all know in our day-to-day plenty of examples, right? Like, if you have emotionally immature parents, sometimes the slightest criticism causes them to lash out because they can't process it, because they never learned how to. So then it becomes, okay, so I'm just the worst parent ever, and like it gets really big and emotional. Or boomers at grocery stores, when they can't get the self-checkout to work, they start lashing out at the people working there. We see this all the time in our day-to-day. There's plenty of examples of how not being able to process anger and frustration and sadness will cause you to lash out inwards and out towards others in bad way. Whenever you hear the term keep sweet, this is what it's talking about, where women are expected to never be emotional or be angry. Morgan had every right to be angry and exhausted and frustrated. And they're moralizing that anger and frustration and exhaustion as a spiritual failing, when really it's just a biological need that our bodies have and something that our bodies do. Religions will rely so heavily on demonizing certain emotions when they're just neutral biological tools. Morgan's anger here is not really about pickleball. It's this unprocessed mourning of all this she's lost to motherhood. Like, she can't even have a freaking hobby. She's exhausted all the time and has this expectation that is so unrealistic while Paul gets to live his dreams. And Morgan doesn't get to do that. Everyone, including women, deserves to be sad and mad at times. Everyone has to be sad and mad at times. Sadness and anger are these biological responses our body have that serve a purpose. And not processing them is just gonna destroy you mentally. These systems rely on demonizing and numbing these emotions because of the purpose they serve. And this is so important. It's the main takeaway from this video. Anger pushes you and motivates you to protect yourself and defend yourself. If they can numb that out of you or demonize it to the point where you will never feel it or acknowledge it, then you're never going to defend yourself and they can do whatever they want. You won't speak up for yourself, and that's what they want from women. Sadness is your body's way of motivating you to seek connection. If you're never feeling that and processing it properly, you're never reaching out for connection, and you're isolated. And when you're isolated, you're easier to control. There's a reason that demonizing these emotions has been beneficial for the continuation of these abusive religions throughout human history. This isn't new. It's something we've seen the entire time it's existed. So I'm going to stop reacting to the video there. Morgan goes on later to say that she had a spiritual experience where, she realized from a sad video that she needs to have a grateful heart posture or something like that. Gratefulness and thankfulness are great things. Gratitude is an amazing thing. I think it's the key to happiness, sincerely. Not when you're using it to bypass necessary emotions, though. Not when you're using it to beat yourself up to the point where you're not allowed to be human. And this whole video from Paul and Morgan is Paul being unable to understand that he was wrong, because this system doesn't allow him to be wrong, because if he's wrong, God's wrong, because they think he's the mouthpiece of God, and him spiritually bypassing his way around that so that he doesn't have to face the uncomfortable feeling of being wrong. And then Morgan internalizing shame and anger towards herself and beating herself up because she's not allowed to safely express it any other way. Even being angry at pickleball is seen as a spiritual failing. Imagine her trying to be mad at Paul. She can't do that. And then her brain was literally searching for a way to make sense of this spiritually and confirm that she was in the wrong. So she took that video as evidence that she should be more grateful, have a grateful heart posture all the time, when that's not normal and healthy. But she needs to think that to survive. So Paul and Morgan did create a follow-up video to this video addressing the hate, quote unquote. I don't think it was hate. I think it was valid criticism. But I wanted to address it. I'm not going to go through it because it's nothing world-changing. But I do think it's very telling because one, we learned that Morgan doesn't read the comments. And two, Paul, in my opinion, strongly strawmans the criticism in comments. It seems like he doesn't understand what people are saying at all. And gives what I guess is a half-assed apology. So Morgan doesn't even know what people are saying. She probably has no idea that all the comments are deeply empathetic to her. And she thinks they're just insane haters, quote unquote, from Reddit. I went through all the comments. Most of them are very, very concerned. Just like me. I feel so much empathy for Morgan. He just misrepresented all the comments. He still doesn't get it. I can just tell he just can't accept. He only on a very shallow level acknowledges that he maybe did some things wrong. They don't understand the criticisms and all, and Morgan doesn't even hear them. Also, in this video, Morgan says, they attack Paul because, anytime the camera's on, I'm the one having a meltdown. I'm the one, breaking down. And they've said before that they, do believe this is because women are more emotional. But no, it's because you're the one being pushed to the breaking point. For their entire relationship, Morgan has been the one pushed to the breaking point. If you go way back, Morgan didn't want to have kids again because she found it incredibly traumatic with the first time. And she was pressured by this ideology to continue to have kids even though she didn't want to and found it traumatic. She has been open about her struggles with BPD, but she is victim of this ideology that believes that prayer and, repentance and scripture are enough to heal you, so you don't need medication, you don't need your service dog. So she gave all that up. She's the one who has to take care of the kids 24/7, as we discussed many times, with no breaks. Paul gets to go on his little kid-free retreats after her second pregnancy or second birth, and it is not because of an inherent quality of you, Morgan. It is because you have been pushed to the breaking point this entire relationship. Is it the chicken or the egg situation? And I'm here to tell you, you are not the source of those breakdowns. So yeah, I just wanted to bring that up, that they did follow up, and that it sucked too. It sucked. Thanks for watching.